Emotional Intelligence and Leadership, an introduction to emotional intelligence competencies and self-awareness. This is really the first model that we're exploring today, or one of the first ones, that really gives you a lens for leadership. Emotional intelligence is a really popular term. It's been used a lot lately. It just gets bantered around. You've probably heard it. You might have ideas about it. And it's used to describe, in general, a leadership model, but it's also been used to describe a way of being, a stance with children, with teachers. We're going to really use a lens today about leadership and coaching. Okay. It's widely popular, emotional intelligence, like I said, when referring to employees and leaders. Yet it's frequently misunderstood. People often think it's about being nice or about displaying being emotional, right? So you're nice and you're emotional, and that somehow is emotional intelligence. But it's not really. It's a well-researched framework that has little to do with either being nice or being emotional. The emotional intelligence model stems from extensive research that sought to understand the distinctive behaviors of exceptional leaders compared to the average leader. So that's an important point. It was created in a way and researched in a way to look at what was an outstanding or exceptional leader and compared to an average leader. What are the differences? What are the characteristic differences? The term itself, emotional intelligence, was originally coined by John Mayer and Peter Salovey. Peter Salovey is now, and maybe not while you're hearing this, but he's been the president of Yale University. This emotional intelligence was later researched in the workplace and with a little bit more of an empirical behavioral background by Dan Goleman and Richard Boyatzis. So what insights does the research offer regarding the behaviors that set outstanding leaders in the workplace apart from the rest? So what is the difference between an outstanding and an average leader? The research on emotional intelligence uncovered the qualities that distinguish outstanding leaders, and it involves the capacity to, one, recognize and understand one's emotions, referred to often as self-awareness. So being aware of your own emotions, paying attention to them, being aware of what you're actually feeling. And believe it or not, that is an art as well as a science. Not everybody can do that. And if you do have that talent, you're a little bit ahead of the game. Number two, comprehend the consequences of your emotions and be able to manage them adeptly. That's a term we call self-management. So being able to manage those emotions that you're feeling. So being aware of them and managing them. Three, discern and empathize with the emotions of others, as well as grasp the dynamics of group interactions. This is actually known as social awareness. So this is about being able to understand what's going on around you, or as I like to say, being able to read the room, being able to read those around you, and whether they're in groups or they're individuals, be able to have some sense. Obviously, your perception of what's going on around you is still your perception, and that's part of your self-awareness. Recognizing that you see something in a group, or you see something or feel something from another person, and also recognizing you may or may not be correct in that, but you're attentive to it. So that would be social awareness. Four is to possess effective communication skills to collaborate with individuals and teams, labeled as relationship management. And I'd like to say this group of things, relationship management, is kind of like learning how to play in the playground with other people well, being collaborative, knowing how to communicate directly. So those kinds of things, often those are the things when you get a training program, that's the bundle of skills that you end up learning there. Interestingly enough, it doesn't always work, because you could teach people relationship skills or relationship management, but if they don't have self-awareness or they can't manage their emotions, it's really hard to actually use skills like that to overcome the deficit of not being able to manage your emotions or not being aware of yourself. So those are the four different large categories of emotional intelligence. There's also many competencies within these large categories, which you'll be able to read about and we'll cover in some different situations. I want to say that this is a bi-directional model. So it operates on a bidirectional framework. And what we mean by this, that throughout this program, we'll introduce various models that we'll call bidirectional. In essence, bidirectional means that a model like emotional intelligence serves a dual purpose. It refines your own self-awareness and hones your coaching techniques. So you can use it for your own self-awareness. You, as coaches who have higher emotional intelligence, tend to do better as coaches. And you'll see that even in the ICF competency model, that many of the competencies require emotional intelligence. So as a coach, your ability to hone and continue to work on these emotional intelligence competencies or behaviors could be very helpful to you. Concurrently, it offers a perspectives to better understand your client. It's a lens for you to see your client, providing a reservoir of insights that can aid in their leadership development. So as you look at your client, you can also see that that client could do some work on some various areas, and you could kind of help them, guide them towards those things. And it gives you a language. I think one of the best things about emotional intelligence is you have a language. You could talk to your client about an emotion that they have, a behavior that they had, and talk about like what happened with them during that time. And is there a way they could self-contain? Is there a way they could walk away? Is there a way they can manage? Is there a way they could notice those emotions coming up before they end up derailing them? So this is a really important tool. I use it a lot with my clients in terms of the language, that I could talk to them about becoming more aware of their strengths and their weaknesses, becoming more aware of how confident they might be, becoming more aware of what's really going on in the team and the team dynamics around them, becoming more aware of the political and power structures around them. So these are all terms and processes that you can get from this emotional intelligence model. So it's very helpful. How did social science discover the secrets of outstanding leadership? So this is a little nerdy. This is the kind of thing I really like. I like to know how the research was done. So I'm going to tell you in like 6 steps. The researchers so how did researchers uncover the essence of extraordinary leadership? Behind the theories and philosophies, there's tangible research highlights that allow EI to be distinguished from other models or other leadership models. So the research method comprised of, number one, something we call behavioral event interviews or interviews. So people were interviewed in using this technique called behavioral event interviewing. Some of you might be familiar with it. And in those interviews, both average and above average leaders were interviewed. Those leaders were picked out by people in their companies. This was done in the workplace. So they were picked out either by both their direct reports and also their leaders, their supervisors, to say, hey, that person, we think these are the outstanding leaders and these are the average leaders. Sometimes people ask, why weren't below average leaders interviewed? Well, the reason is we are not interested in people that have 0 leadership skills. We wanted to look at what set people apart from being great leaders and being average leaders. Most of the time they're okay, but these other people are the ones we want to have more of, right? So these interviews were done and between outstanding and average leaders, and they were asked in these interviews, people get asked what they think, what they feel, and what they did. So it's kind of like they're asked for different to give you situations. If I'm the interviewer, I'm asking the person to pick out a couple of situations they've been in. Could be a positive, could be a negative situation, and ask what they did, what they thought, and what they felt in this process. This brings out behaviors. It kind of highlights behaviors. After that, some very wonderful detail-oriented people ended up coding those interviews. These interviews were analyzed to identify patterns. We didn't know what patterns, or they didn't know what patterns they were looking for, but they were looking at all these different interviews, hundreds of interviews, to look for some patterns, some identifying leadership behaviors that might have been patterned. They could see in the patterns. There was another little piece that happened here too. There was an administration of IQ tests, intelligence tests. This was to determine if there was a relationship between IQ and leadership. For many years, there was a lot of assumptions about IQ, that if you're smart, you'll be a good leader. And yet people's experience, and yours probably as well, were that a great leader doesn't necessarily mean that they're super intelligent, and super intelligent people certainly aren't always good leaders. So we wanted to really, the research in this was really done to kind of find out if there was any relationship at all. Next, the interviews were analyzed based on the themes from interviews created and a 360-degree survey that was done. So like a paper and pen or a computer-based, pick out how often somebody behaves in a certain way. Those were then also done to validate the findings. It was important to make sure that the data from the interviews matched the way others saw the leaders, which is why there was a 360. So in other words, the interviews were done. This is what the person reported, but did other people see it similarly? So that's where those surveys came in. The results revealed that a majority of the differences between average leaders and outstanding leaders involved awareness and management of emotions, or what we now call emotional intelligence. We found that many of our strongly held assumptions about leadership were just not correct. But what we did find was that there were some really powerful behaviors, as we discussed before: social awareness, self-awareness, self-management, relationship management, that did predict outstanding leadership. So leadership myths were debunked by emotional intelligence research. And a lot of maybe the myths and maybe just the assumptions people had. So the result of this research confirmed that many common held beliefs about leadership just were not true. And here's a few common ones. Intelligence in leadership. It was a common misconception that a higher IQ directly equated to superior leadership abilities. While previous studies have challenged this belief, many can personally attest that being a highly intelligent or skilled in an area doesn't inherently make someone an effective leader. Emotional intelligence research indicates that while outstanding leaders tend to have an average IQ of about 120, so do many other average leaders. Interestingly, one facet of IQ, pattern recognition, did correlate with leadership prowess. This suggests that exceptional leaders might excel at discerning both cognitive patterns and emotional or behavioral patterns in individuals and groups, enhancing their ability to understand and respond to diverse situations. So in a sense, if you could see a pattern in mathematics or a pattern in language, you might also be able to see a pattern in emotional response or a pattern in people behavior or group dynamics. Trait theories in leadership, basically they were kind of saying you're either born with it or you're born without it. For over a century, researchers have endeavored to establish a connection between inherent personality traits such as extroversion, introversion, or charisma, and leadership effectiveness. These efforts have largely been inconclusive. The emotional intelligence model suggests that certain behaviors, which can be cultivated with maturity and personal development, hold greater significance for leadership than what could be considered habits or even innate traits. This kind of blows up what we used to call the great man theory, that's just certain people, and in those days it was definitely men, were born with certain traits that made them great leaders. And that's actually seen as kind of not true. And it's very positive because it means that we all have an opportunity to be a great leader. It's not about something you were born with. So studies have repeatedly shown that emotions spread irresistibly when people are near each other, even when contact is completely nonverbal. It's actually interesting too. I think Erickson did a lot of this work, where he showed that like even small little parts of your face that kind of make little wrinkles here and there when you smile or when you frown are read by, we read those from each other. We might not recognize that, we're not aware of it, but we're unconsciously reading those different facial expressions. And actually there's some interesting research about animals too, that like, especially like dogs or cats, can read the emotions of their the person that owns them, their person, by reading their face. So in studies where leaders were observed in group situations too, the other individuals in the room watched the leader more closely, and they concurred most readily with the leader's ideas and ultimately emulated the leader's mood. So moods actually do matter. They actually are electric. They kind of go from one person to another. The leader sets the emotional tone of the entire group, and the optimism in that leader is a differentiator between average and above average leaders. So leaders that recognize that people are watching them and aware of them and maybe paying more attention to them than others are conscious of authentically figuring out how to get themselves into a place, into a mood that's going to be a positive process for other people. The best leaders model hard work and can take constant pressure. This was an old idea, Puritan idea from our country, probably the United States. Emotional intelligence has affirmed that outstanding leaders possess a clear vision. They set high standards for themselves, called achievement orientation, effectively hold other people accountable, and demonstrate resilience. It is now understood that excessively demanding leaders not only exhaust their teams, but also risk experiencing burning out themselves. So the good news about emotional intelligence is that it's about growth. You can, or your client can hone these skills, hone these behaviors, make changes, and learn. I always give this example about a little kid, like a 2 or 3-year-old, and ask how much can they control their emotions compared to a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old. So that kind of gives you an idea about the way we do develop skills, coping mechanisms, processes to behave in ways that we would call adult. And now what we're looking at is how do we behave in ways that we not only call adult, but that we call outstanding leadership. So looking at that, that's the difference with emotional intelligence. I love the fact that this is a growth model. It's exciting to me because it means that we all have the opportunity to learn and get better at these things. You come with lots of talents and you can hone those talents. And I've seen this over and over again where I start working with a client and they're out of control, or they're not realizing that their lack of awareness is creating a lot of misreads and a lot of misperceptions in the organization, and watch them kind of become more aware of it, change, work on it, practice it, and become not a different person, but much more effective in their role. So emotional intelligence is about growth and it's about learning. Every one of the competencies in this model and the attached behaviors can be learned. So there's more about emotional intelligence and coaching to come, and you'll be getting some experiential exercises to help you absorb more of this information.